Imagine a world where your name is the law, where, for generations, the same family has held the keys to the courthouse, investigated the crimes, and decided what justice looks like. A world where power isn't just inherited, it's expected. In one corner of South Carolina, that wasn't a metaphor. It was the Murdaugh family business. On the evening of June 7th, 2021, a 911 call was placed from a sprawling hunting estate called Moselle. The caller's voice was frantic, breathless. He said his wife and son had been badly shot. He said he had just come home and found them. The dispatcher asked if he knew who did it. He said he had no idea. But this story doesn't begin with a 911 call. It begins with a legacy. A legacy of influence so deep, it was said the Murdaughs weren't above the law in their county. They were the law. The caller was Alex Murdaugh, the fourth generation of this legal dynasty. A prominent personal injury attorney, a married father of 2 sons. By all public accounts, a man who had it all. The big house, the successful career, the close-knit family. Photographs showed a smiling man, arm around his wife Maggie, beaming with pride at his sons. The perfect picture of a life built on solid ground. But the ground beneath Alex Murdaugh wasn't solid, it was hollow. And then the journey taken place. A quiet, urgent meeting at the law firm his great-grandfather founded. A meeting about money, a lot of money that was missing. Before we get deeper into this, hit that like button, it helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. Subscribe, so you never miss a case like this, and turn on notifications. I want to know, where are you watching from? Comment your country below. It's incredible how these stories connect people across the world, all searching for truth. Your engagement honors the victims and proves why these cases must never be forgotten. Now, here's where the story takes a turn. That meeting at the law firm ended. Alex Murdaugh drove home. He later told police he visited his ailing mother. And then, he said, he found his family. The official police report would describe a terrible, violent tragedy. 2 lives ended, a husband and father, suddenly alone. A community in shock. That was the story presented to the world. But the real story, the one that would slowly unravel over the next 20 months, is far more complex. It's a story about what happens when the pressure to maintain a lie, to hold up a crumbling facade, becomes the most powerful force in a person's life. Research shows that when financial ruin, public shame, and the collapse of a life's work converge, a person's perception of reality can violently narrow. Options disappear. The unthinkable can start to look like the only way out. This is the psychological puzzle at the heart of the Murdaugh case. Not a whodunit, but a why. How does a man who seemingly has everything, family, legacy, wealth, end up at the center of such incomprehensible loss? The pressure on Alex Murdaugh in the spring of 2021 wasn't a single thing. It was a perfect storm. His youngest son, Paul, was facing a high-profile criminal trial for a fatal boat crash that had already torn their small community apart. The civil lawsuits from that crash were mounting, threatening the family's fortune. And now, his own law partners were asking questions about funds that had vanished. He drove home to Moselle that night, carrying all of that. The investigation into the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh would become one of the most followed in American history. It would involve a staged shooting, a confession to multi-million-dollar thefts, and a murder trial that captivated a nation. But it would all hinge on one small, digital clue. A clue recorded by one of the victims just minutes before they died. A clue that would prove Alex Murdaugh was lying. And that lie would change everything. This is not just a story about a crime. It's a story about a mask. The mask of the successful lawyer. The loving family man, the pillar of the community. And what happens when that mask begins to crack? And the person underneath believes they have no other choice but to smash it completely. We begin in the twilight of a dynasty, on an ordinary day that became the last day. And with a question that hangs in the air to this very second, what was he thinking on that drive home? We ended with a question. What was Alex Murdaugh thinking on that drive home? To understand the pressure in that car, we have to rewind. We have to look at the cracks that were spreading through his picture-perfect life long before that night. The first major crack appeared on a cold night in February 2019. Paul Murdaugh, Alex's youngest son, was allegedly driving a family boat while intoxicated. It crashed into a bridge piling. A 19-year-old woman named Mallory Beach was thrown into the water. Her body was found a week later. The community was devastated. And for the first time, the Murdaugh name was associated not with authority and protection, but with tragedy and privilege. Paul was charged with boating under the influence, causing death. A massive civil lawsuit was filed against Alex, holding him responsible for providing the boat and the alcohol. For the Murdaughs, this wasn't just a legal problem. It was an existential threat. The lawsuit threatened to expose the family's finances to something called discovery, a legal process where everything can be examined. Every account, every transaction, every secret. And Alex Murdaugh had secrets, big ones. Research shows that when financial ruin, public shame, and the collapse of a life's work converge, a person's perception of reality can violently narrow. Options disappear. The unthinkable can start to look like the only way out. For Alex, these pressures weren't theoretical. They were invoices coming due. He was a partner at the law firm his grandfather built, PMPED. He handled wrongful death cases, securing multi-million-dollar settlements for grieving families. But according to state investigators and his own later guilty pleas, he had been stealing from those clients for years. He'd forge signatures, invent fees, and funnel money meant for widows and orphans into his own accounts. By the spring of 2021, the scheme was collapsing. The boat crash lawsuit was moving forward. His law partners, his own family members, were starting to ask questions. The financial web he'd built was trembling. And then we come to the specific, documented pressure of June 7th, 2021. That morning, Alex Murdaugh went to work. He sat in a meeting at PMPED. The firm's chief financial officer confronted him. There was a problem, a deficit. Nearly $792,000 was missing from an account. They needed an explanation. They needed it fixed. Alex said he would take care of it. This is the spike. The moment the background tension snaps into a clear, urgent point. The confrontation about the missing money happened on the morning of June 7th. The 911 call from Moselle came that night. He left that meeting, drove to see his mother, and then went home. To his wife, Maggie, who had come to the estate that day. To his son, Paul, who was there dealing with the ongoing fallout from the boat crash. The prosecution would later argue this was the catalyst, the point of no return, with the financial fraud at his firm about to be exposed. and the boat crash lawsuit, ready to tear open his personal finances. Alex Murdaugh was facing a day of reckoning. His entire world, his career, his fortune, his family's legacy was hours away from evaporating. So what do you do when you're in a hole and every shovel you use just makes it deeper? For Alex Murdaugh, the story he told investigators was simple. He wasn't there. He had been at his mother's house for an extended visit. He came home, saw the lights on at the kennels, drove down, and found them. He was a grieving husband, father of a random, brutal attack. For over a year, that was the narrative. A powerful, sympathetic man, struck by an unspeakable tragedy. The investigation swirled around him, but he was the mourner, not the suspect. Then, investigators looked at Paul Murdaugh's cell phone one more time, and they found a video. It was a short, mundane clip Paul had taken at the dog kennels at Moselle. The timestamp was 8:44 p.m. on June 7th. In the background, you can hear voices. You can hear Maggie's voice. And you can clearly, unmistakably, hear another voice. It was Alex Murdaugh's voice. He was at the kennels, minutes before the murders happened. He was there, talking to his wife and son, just before they died. Every story he had told for 20 months about being at his mother's, about arriving late, about finding them shattered in that instant. That small, digital artifact changed everything. It didn't prove he pulled a trigger, but it proved he was a liar. It placed him at the scene of the crime at the critical moment, which he had vehemently and repeatedly denied. The grieving father was now the husband with an inexplicable secret. The man who had lost everything was now the man who couldn't explain where he was when it was lost. So, if he was there, what happened in those minutes after the video stopped? What could possibly explain the sequence of events that began with the father chatting with his family and ended, shortly after, with him calling 911 in panic? The search for that answer would lead investigators down a much darker and far more bizarre path than anyone could have imagined. A path that included a second shooting, a multi-million-dollar confession, and a motive so cold it defied understanding. We left with a question hanging in the air. What happened in the minutes after that kennel video stopped playing? After Alex Murdaugh's voice fell silent on the recording, and the ordinary evening snapped into something else entirely. To understand the weight of those missing minutes, we have to go back just a bit further to the hours leading up to them. To a text message that afternoon, Maggie Murdaugh had been at their beach house. Alex called her and asked her to meet him at Moselle, their hunting estate. He said he wanted them to go visit his terminally ill father together. But Maggie texted a friend. She said her husband sounded F. Her exact word was fishy. She said he was up something. She went anyway. She drove to Moselle, parked at the house, and walked down to the dog kennels, where her son Paul was. It was around 8:15 p.m. The family had dinner. And then, Paul took out his phone. At 8:44 p.m., Paul recorded a short, mundane video at the kennels. In the background, you can hear his mother's voice. And you can clearly, unmistakably, hear his father's voice. Alex Murdaugh was there, talking with his wife and son. This fact is the linchpin, the point on which the entire story turns. For over 20 months, Alex Murdaugh told everyone, the police, his family, his friends, a specific story. He said that after dinner, he had taken a nap on the couch. He said he had not gone to the kennels. He said he had woken up, driven to visit his ailing mother, and only returned home later to discover the horror. But the video proved that story was a lie. He was at the Kennels with Maggie and Paul minutes before they died. So what happened in the 5 minutes after that video ended? According to phone data and the investigation, this is the sequence. At 8:49 p.m., both Maggie and Paul's phones locked for the final time. They stopped moving. Their digital lives ended. At 9:06 p.m., data from Alex Murdaugh's car shows it started. He left Moselle. He drove to his mother's house in Almeida. While there, and on the drive back, he made a series of phone calls. Prosecutors would later argue these calls were an attempt to establish an alibi, to create a digital trail showing he was elsewhere. Then, ex-PM Alex Murdaugh Moselle. Minutes later, at 10:07 p.m., he called 911. The call is a recording of pure human distress. He's frantic. He was a dispatcher to hurry. He says, "It's bad." He says, "Nobody's breathing." When asked if he saw anyone, he says no. He tells the dispatcher he had already touched the bodies, trying to find a pulse. First, responders arrived at 10:25 p.m. What they found was a scene of profound violence. Maggie Murdaugh, 52, and Paul Murdaugh, 22, had been shot multiple times near the dog kennels. The coroner would place their time of death between 9 o'clock and 9:30 that night. This segment does not dwell on the mechanics of violence. It dwells on the mechanics of discovery, of a story unraveling in real time. The focus is not on the act, but on the immediate, cascading aftermath, the 911 call, the arrival of law enforcement, the beginning of a mystery where the person reporting the crime would become the only logical person who could have committed it. Because Alex Murdaugh, by his own admission on the witness stand, was the last person to see them alive. And for 19 months, he lied about it. This is the emotional pivot that reframes everything. In segment 1, we saw the 911 call as the start of the tragedy. Now we see it as the end point of a sequence he initiated. In segment 2, we saw the immense financial pressure building like a perfect storm. Now, we see that storm reaching its landfall in a 5-minute window on a June night. The loving father from the photographs was at the scene. The distressed husband on the 911 call had just left it. The man facing financial ruin had, according to the state's theory, created a catastrophic diversion. But a major question remained, one that the defense would seize upon. If Alex Murdaugh did this, where was the direct, physical proof? There were weapon never found nor eyewitness. The prosecution's case was built on a powerful motive, a shattered alibi, and a lot of digital breadcrumbs. So how do you prove what happened in those 5 minutes without a smoking gun? The investigation would now turn from the what and the when to the much more difficult how. And it would lead them to a piece of evidence so bizarre, it would seem like a plot twist in a novel, a blue raincoat, and a staged shooting on the side of a rural road. The immediate aftermath of the murders at Moselle set in motion to parallel investigations. One was public, a search for a killer in the night. The other was private, hidden in spreadsheets and bank records, and it was about to explode. For weeks, Alex Murdaugh was the grieving widower. He gave interviews. He mourned publicly. He was a victim. But in the background, the digital and financial forensics teams were working. They were looking at the cell phone data, the car data, and they were looking at the money. And the money told a story of its own. Here, is where the investigation enters, what we call the necessary, complex valley, where simple narratives break down and we have to sit with contradictions and unanswered questions. This isn't about shock. It's about following the evidence, even when it leads to confusing places. The state's case was becoming clear: pressure, opportunity, and a shattered alibi. But the physical evidence had significant gaps. First, there was no murder weapon. 2 different, family-owned rifles were missing, but they were never found. Without the gun, there's no ballistic match, no definitive forensic link. Second, there were conflicting accounts and evidence about Alex's clothes. He told police he had been wearing a certain shirt and shorts. But an acquaintance would later testify that Alex showed up at his house late that night in entirely different, clean clothes. Investigators would seize a blue rain jacket from his parents' house, which later tested positive for gunshot residue. But whose residue? When did it get there? The defense would argue this was contamination. Third, the state's own evidence had unexplained elements. A DNA analyst testified that a small amount of male DNA, that was not Alex's, was found under Maggie Murdaugh's fingernails. It was not enough to identify a specific person, but it was there a tiny, ambiguous data point the defense would call reasonable doubt. So, the prosecution's case wasn't built on a single smoking gun. It was built on a constellation of circumstantial evidence. The video placing him at the scene, the lies about his alibi, and, most importantly, the motive. And that's when the second investigation that won into the money crashed into the first. In early September 2021, Alex Murdaugh's law firm Forson. The financial scheme had been discovered. He had stolen millions. On September 4th, just as this was becoming public, something strange happened. Alex called 911 again. He reported he had been shot in the head while changing a tire on a rural roadside. He survived. The story made national news. Within 10 days, that story completely collapsed. State investigators announced that the roadside shooting had been staged. They alleged that Alex Murdaugh had conspired with a former client to kill him in an assisted suicide plot, so that his surviving son, Buster, could collect a $10 million life insurance payout. The man who had lost his wife and son was now accused of orchestrating his own murder. The narrative shattered. The grieving father was now a desperate man willing to stage his own death. Why would he do that? The prosecution argued it was the same reason he killed Maggie and Paul, to buy time and sympathy as his financial world imploded. It was another catastrophic, theatrical solution to a problem created by lies. Faced with this, Alex Murdaugh did something unexpected. He began to confess. Not to murder, but to the financial crimes. He pleaded guilty to nearly 100 state and federal counts of fraud, theft, and money laundering. He admitted to stealing over $9 million from clients, including a settlement meant for the sons of his housekeeper, Gloria Sud. This is the dip. We've moved from the emotional horror of the crime to the complex, sometimes dry, details of financial fraud and contradictory evidence. It's the part of the story where you have to think, not just feel. But just when the world thought the story was heading for a straightforward trial and conviction, a new twist emerged that questioned the very foundation of the justice that was about to be served. After his conviction in March 2023, Murdaugh's defense team filed an explosive motion. They alleged that the elected clerk of court for the trial, Becky Hill, had tampered with the jury. They claimed she had pressured jurors to reach a quick guilty verdict to boost sales of a book she was writing about the case. A hearing was held in January 2024. Jurors took the stand. Some said they felt no pressure. One said clerk, Hill told them to watch Murdaugh closely and not to be fooled by his testimony. The judge denied a new trial, finding the jury wasn't directly influenced. But the story didn't end there. In May 2025, Becky Hill was arrested. She was charged with perjury and obstruction of justice related to her testimony in that very hearing. This changes everything. It's no longer just about whether Alex Murdaugh is guilty. It's about whether the trial itself was fair. Did the system work, or did it become part of the spectacle? This allegation throws the entire proceeding into a shadow of doubt, creating a perfect, unresolved hook that leads directly to the final legal resolution. The verdict was in. The sentence was life. But with the appeal now pending before the South Carolina Supreme Court, hinging on these jury tampering claims, the story of guilt and justice became entangled in a new, profound question about the integrity of the process. In March of 2023, a jury in Walterboro, South Carolina, found Richard Alexander Murdaugh guilty on 2 counts of murder. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. The following day, Judge Clifton Newman sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences in prison without the possibility of parole. The legal resolution, in the strictest sense, was complete. Guilty, life. But in the American justice system, a verdict is not always the final period. It can be ACM Isiolo and Alex Murdaugh appealed. His defense attorneys took the case to the South Carolina Supreme Court. Their argument was not primarily about innocence. It was about process. They contended that the trial was irreparably tainted, that the saturation of media attention, combined with what they alleged was improper conduct by the court clerk, Becky Hill, created a miscarriage of justice. They argued the jury was pressured, that the spectacle overwhelmed the facts. The prosecution responded with final briefs, arguing the evidence of guilt was overwhelming and that the jury's verdict was sound. The High Court scheduled a date to hear the case, February 11th, 2026. The personal impact is fractal, broken into 1 million pieces. Maggie's and Paul's lives are memorials. Their surviving son, Buster, lives with a name now synonymous with national scandal. The families of the victims of Alex Murdaugh's financial crimes, the housekeeper's sons. The injured client were robbed twice, first of their money, then of any simple narrative of justice. The community that once viewed the Murdaugh name with deference now views it with a complex mix of pity, anger, and morbid fascination. The dynasty is over, but the systemic impact, the one that lingers in the air like static after a storm, is mighty subtle. This case became a lens on power, what it means to have it, what it costs to keep it, and what happens when the person who wields it believes they are ultimately unreachable. The appeal pending before the state Supreme Court asks a technical, legal question: was the trial fair? But the question that echoes out of this story, the one that remains long after the court are filed, is Modi Humanenko. It is a question about stories themselves. The stories we tell about ourselves, the successful lawyer, the devoted father, and the stories we tell about others. It is about the moment the gap between those stories becomes a chasm, and a person decides, for reasons we may never fully access, that the only way to close it is with an act of unimaginable violence. We want motives to be clear. Greed, rage, a snapping point. But what if the motive is simply the relentless, escalating pressure to maintain a lie? What if the why is just the exhausting, soul-crushing work of holding up a facade that has grown too heavy to carry? Alex Murdaugh sits in a prison cell. The legal system has rendered its judgment. But the psychological truth of why, the precise configuration of pressure, opportunity, and choice that existed in those minutes after the Kennel video ended, that truth is locked away. Not in a cell, in the unreachable space of one man's mind. This so has so many do with a close. Behind it is the answer to the only question that ever really matters. Why? And some doors, once shut, are never opened again.